This podcast is sponsored by nobody. Hey dudes, welcome to Splat from the Past, the only 80s themed horror sci-fi show where things can get totally radical. Now today, I will be welcoming a very talented character actor, and I am talking about John DeMita. John, of course, played the conniving con artist magician Fazio in Leprechaun 3. He was also in the very underrated horror classic Spellbinder, celebrating its 35th anniversary, and he guest starred on a lot of great shows back in the 80s like Remington Steele, Hunter, The Facts of Life. He was on Freddy's Nightmares, and Star Trek The Next Generation, lots of great stuff, and we're going to talk about that today. He's also taught at a lot of colleges, and he's done voiceover work. And it's going to be a great conversation today. I was hoping to do this for St. Paddy's Day, but we ended up connecting a week ago. Also, happy birthday, Quentin Tarantino, the big 6-0. And I hope he makes that one more movie, because even though I really, really loved Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I didn't think that it would be a fitting swan song, so I hope he makes one more. Also, happy birthday, two-time guest Suzanne von Schack. So yeah, here is my interview with John DeMita.
Hello.
Hey John, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I am spectacular. This is such a great honor. Thank you for taking the time today.
No, it's my pleasure. Thanks.
Absolutely. So, going back in time, did you gravitate toward acting early on in your childhood?
Yeah, being an actor was pretty much the only thing I really wanted to do for most of my childhood.
Right. So you did a lot of school plays and community theater?
Not community theater, but I did a lot of, the sort of traditional route of school plays in middle school and high school, and then I was a theater studies and English major at Yale when I was in college, and then studied acting at the graduate level at the American Conservatory Theater in San Francisco. So it was a direct path to my career.
Nice. Yeah, are you born and raised in Queens?
I was born in Queens and lived there and on Long Island until I was in high school pretty much, and then we moved to Connecticut. Then I just stayed in Connecticut for college and moved to the West Coast for school, and then have stayed here pretty much on the West ever since.
Mm-hmm. Did your parents take you to a lot of Broadway shows growing up?
No, it wasn't like that at all. I was an anomaly in my family. My dad was a corporate attorney. My mom was a dedicated mom and housewife, and raised 5 kids. So they were very generous in letting each of us, all 5 of us, pursue what we were passionate about. And I was the only one of the bunch. I was the, like that oddball in the family that wanted to be an actor. Everyone else was kind of somewhat less artistic route.
Yeah.
The great thing about my dad and my mom was, they were always very supportive, even though, as everyone knows, it's not a stable or a predictable career, not least in terms of income.
They thought of it as more like a black sheep path, in a way.
Well, they just thought it was just unusual. I mean, they didn't think of me as the black sheep, like I was in disfavor. They were anything but. It was all really great with them. They always went with the philosophy, and I tried to do the same with my kids, that if it makes you happy, then go for it, because otherwise, what's the point?
Oh yeah, that's a great way of looking at it, I have to say.
Yeah.
So when you attended Yale, you studied acting there, right?
Well, yes and no. It was at the time less of an acting program and more of a literature-based program. So, I mean, I had the option to go to more of an acting program at other colleges,
mm-hmm.
but I wanted to, because I was lucky enough to get in. I mean, frankly, I was grateful for that. So I thought, well, I can't say no to this opportunity, even though I knew it really wasn't a conservatory. There was one acting class a year, and that was it. The rest of the time, it was literature, music, and creative writing, and then, of course, there was the usual general education of language and science and all that. So it was more like a liberal arts education. That's why I ultimately went to grad school, because that was like one of those, fame-type drama schools where they just had you working 12 hours a day, and it was just acting.
Did any of your classmates go on to become successful in acting?
Yeah, a lot of them have, in both college and in grad school. Yeah, I have a lot of friends who have, luckily, like me, been able to continue to be creative and participate in acting and other parts of show business throughout the years. So, yeah, it's been good. I mean, I always feel like studying acting is a great way to just be a better collaborator in whatever you end up doing.
Mm-hmm.
So I have friends who are wonderful actors who went on to become amazing therapists or even real estate agents. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I think the training they got was really essential. And then, of course, inevitably, one or two people becomes very famous and kind of puts everything in another context. But I'm happy to say that most of the people I went to school with are still actively doing it in some capacity.
Yeah, I mean, the last 6 years I've been doing this podcast, I've been finding out that so many people are interconnected and know each other, because back then it was such a small world, there was no internet.
Yeah, exactly. I do remember, yeah, exactly. And I think also at a certain point, if you manage to stay, creatively engaged in the work, whether you become a writer or a producer, or in my case, I became a director, and I became a voiceover actor, and then I became a college professor. I went up did a lot of different things.
Right.
But if you stay in that world, you will find that you'll run into the same people time and time again. And it's because the people who really manage to figure out a way to keep curious and stay passionate and they don't burn out. And I think that's the real key to success is longevity more than anything else. So, yeah, I run into the same people all the time.
Nice, nice. What year did you get to San Francisco?
Oh, you have to hear a year. Okay, I arrived in San Francisco in 1981. Yeah, long time ago.
Yeah, I'm born and raised in San Francisco, and whenever I find out that people, started out there or lived there or whatever, I just like it. I'm like a kid in a candy store because I love hearing about the time before I was born and everything. So you were at.
Yeah, it was great. San Francisco in the 1980s was.
Yeah.
Amazing place. I mean, it wasn't quite as. I mean, to me, San Francisco was always the backdrop of so many television shows in like the 70s, because I grew up watching that stuff. So I always imagined San Francisco, or even the late 60s, of the movie Bullitt, which was, of course, one of my favorite films.
Oh yeah.
And when I got there was still enough of that left, and there always will be because of the hills. There was still enough of that left when I got there in the early 80s that I could really see it. Now I go back sometimes and it's developed a lot more. There's a lot more construction, a lot more development. So
yeah,
but it's still great. I love the city.
Yeah, there's a lot of good and a lot of bad to it. So you're at the Actors Conservatory?
Yeah, it's called the American Conservatory Theater. It's still running. It's San Francisco. I'm pretty sure it's the oldest theater in San Francisco. It was it at the time was a graduate training program, and which was cool about it was also a working professional theater, like a Broadway house. So your teachers, when you were there studying, were actually on stage in a professional production every night. So it was a sense you were learning from people who were not so far away from the work. They were still doing it. So, and then the big dream was, and this happened to me luckily, that if you were invited to come to the third year, which was a sort of elimination process, they got us down from 48 students in the first year to only 5 in the third year. But if you were lucky enough to get into the third year, you got to act with many of the people you studied with in professional productions on stage every night. And so that was like the best part of it, too, for me, was making those professional relationships, which I still have. I mean, some of my professors at ACT are still my friends, and, they're working still. That's the great thing about being an actor and an artist. Nobody says you have to retire, so you can just keep going.
Well, was Joy Carlin there when you were there?
Oh, of course, yeah. Nancy, her daughter Nancy, was in my class. We were dear friends, yeah. And that's where I met my wife, Julia Fletcher, who was a great friend of the Carlins as well. How do you know Joy?
I had her on a couple of years ago because she was in a couple movies I like Dirty Harry and Smile.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, in Dirty Harry, you'll see a lot of ACT actors in that. Ruth Cobart is in Dirty Harry. She plays the bus driver.
Yeah.
She was a company member. Bill Patterson, he played, I think, a district attorney. I forget, I think he's a district attorney, which gives Harry the bad news why he can't
right.
Scorpio in,
Yeah.
So I got to work with Bill in a production of A Christmas Carol. He was Scrooge. I was his nephew Fred back in the early 80s. So, yeah, there's a lot of old ACT people in those movies.
Absolutely, yeah. And, she was a Compass player with Ed Asner and Nichols and May and all of them, which I did not know. Yeah, I thought that was fantastic when I found that out. So, what year did you move to L.A.?
I moved to LA in '84 because I finished the third year, and back then there was something called the League Auditions, it was called, in which the graduate students from 11 professional training programs in the U.S. all went to New York for a weekend and did a big audition for agents and managers and casting directors. And then based on who wanted to meet you after those auditions, you made some choices. One of the agents I felt most strongly connected to they had a New York office, but they were based in L.A. So I thought, well, this is the perfect time. I'll try Los Angeles because I'm already in San Francisco, and they really were very positive on me. So it seemed like the right thing to do at the time, and I have never regretted it. I've been in L.A. for a long time. I've traveled and gone out of town to do work, and sometimes for as long as a year. I'm doing regional theater sometimes, but I've always considered L.A. my home now.
Yeah. According to IMDb, one of your earliest TV credits was The Facts of Life.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was fun. I mean, and it's out there. I sometimes get messages from people. They say because I think it's on one of the streaming services now. I think they've got the whole series. Yeah, I had a guest star on The Facts of Life back in that was probably 1987. I'm going to say, yeah.
85, it says here.
Oh, okay. Well, after this much time, I'm lucky I got that close.
Was that a lot of fun to do?
It was great. I mean, I'm doing a sitcom, and there are very few shows like that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It was the closest thing to theater that you could get, and I always loved the theater. So working in front of a live studio audience, there's no retakes. We did two versions of everything. I think we ran through the show twice, or if not the entire show, certain scenes of the show. So you did get that chance to try new things. But the difference between that and what I was used to in terms of doing a play was they rewrote the script every day. So that was a challenge, because you could never really get too set on the lines and too set on the character. Although, it was The Facts of Life, so there wasn't exactly a complicated character. It was mostly just playing it was a great couple of scenes with Nancy McKeon.
And the legendary Joyce Bulifant was in this episode. I've talked to her. Very funny lady.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
She was on there was a storyline where Nancy was becoming a teacher, or wanted to be a teacher, and I was the corporate guy, I think. I forgot. I think my name was, it was actually a joke in the show about my name. Because my name was Tom Horn, which is the name of a Steve McQueen movie, which is that's a really hard to get joke nowadays. Nobody knows anything about it. But back then, I guess it was relevant. So Joyce was working, I think, in the high school where Nancy McKeon worked, and I was trying to, sort of snatch her away and bring her to the corporate world.
Yes. And it was pretty funny. Then you did an episode of the 80s reboot of The Twilight Zone, Kentucky Rye, which I just saw this episode on YouTube. Do you remember anything about that?
It was a lot of fun because I got to work with a guy named Jeffrey DeMund, who I was always a big fan of as an actor.
Talented guy.
It's amazing, and he's always been amazing. But, of course, from The Walking Dead, but so many other things, too. The remake of The Book, he's so great in that, too, so... it was fun. I mean, the episodic TV back in the 80s was it was a different world than it is now, because it was basically the big job to get in LA if you were an actor, like a journeyman actor looking for a job. There was just a ton of episodic work. Now with the long format streaming sort of tempo or cadence of shows, it's a little less localized in Los Angeles, and it's a little bit different. It's not tied to any one particular time of year. There's no longer something called pilot season. It just sort of happens when it happens.
Right.
Back then, that was the gig, was doing guest stars and co-stars on episodic shows that paid your bills, and you did theater for your passion and for your art, and then you waited for those bigger opportunities to come up.
Yes, and also you had John Hancock direct this episode. He directed Bang the Drum Slowly.
John Hancock was a legend, yes, absolutely. And at the time, I don't even think I knew. I did not know the the bigness of that. I just worked because I got the job. And then you would find out sometimes later. I also worked with Christian Nyby at one point, Christian Nyby Jr., and his dad directed The Thing. I mean, you find out about these Hollywood legends sometimes while you're working with them, if you're lucky. You know, I've worked with people and I've gotten a chance to actually talk to them about their previous careers or their families. And sometimes you only find out afterwards who that was, and you kind of miss out.
And then Remington Steele, anything stand out about that?
Pierce Brosnan, the nicest guy in the world. I remember because I was a little bit starstruck even back then because, you know, he was just coming up. But I remember sitting in the dressing room, that was the other thing about being an actor in the 80s and TV. If you weren't a series regular, and I didn't get to be a series regular on anything for another decade, but you were just there for the week. So it was really the stars of the show kind of determined what that experience would be like for the guests, the guest stars. And I remember in the dressing room, sitting down, having makeup artists putting on makeup, and Pierce Brosnan sitting right next to me and striking up a conversation with me and being incredibly generous and friendly and kind. It was we made everything a lot easier. You relax right away when as a guest, you feel like you're actually a guest.
Mm-hmm. And my friend Julia Montgomery was in that episode. Did you work with her?
No, I don't think I did. What did she play? Who did she play?
Well, she's best known for doing Revenge of the Nerds, but in this episode here...
Oh, no, I remember. I know who she is, of course. No, I worked with Doris Roberts. Is it Doris Roberts? Yeah, Doris Roberts.
Yeah, from Everybody Loves Raymond.
Right, and Stephanie Zimbalist, I believe.
Yeah.
It was just, the one episode.
How about Hunter?
Hunter, again, guest star of a part. I think I was, it might have been one of those roles where my character, I think I had a name. Sometimes you're just in these jobs, you're called, agent or something. I got to shoot, what's his name, Israel, the guy who played the chainsaw villain from Scarface. I got to shoot him dead. That was tremendous fun. I remember that. It was an enormous drug seizure, cops coming into this warehouse, and it was the first time I saw real practical stunts being done on a large scale because it was a big raid of police officers. So there were a lot of stunt people, a lot of extras, and a lot of principal cast. But they had one big gag they were doing where one of those urban police battering rams was going to knock down the front gate of this warehouse, and it was a real warehouse. They rolled up the metal gate. It must have been 50 feet high, and they put in a dummy one, also made of metal, so that then the battering ram could knock it down. And we all stood at a distance from above, actually, on a catwalk to watch. And when that real police battering ram hit that prop warehouse door, it just kept going and took out the Panavision camera.
Wow.
Oh, my God. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. Everybody ran for their lives. The cameraman, the director of photography, the director himself, everybody had to scatter because that thing just kept on coming and took out. I don't know what that camera cost, but that's the thing I remember most from that.
Yeah, that actor was Al Israel, who's no longer with us.
Al Israel, that's right. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
He's no longer with us. But, of course, at the time, I knew Scarface.
Oh, of course.
That movie. When I got a chance to work with Al, that was like, again, one of those moments where you go, well, luckily this time I knew in advance who it was. So I was like, I couldn't help but ask him stories about Scarface. He was very nice.
Yeah. So you got to work with Johnny Depp on 21 Jump Street.
21 Jump Street, that's right. I went up to Vancouver for one of several times I got to go to Canada for work. That was fun. I actually worked with Peter DeLuise in that episode. I met Johnny Depp, but he was not in the work. My storyline was Peter DeLuise's character, but I did get a chance to meet the whole cast, and so that was fun.
Was Depp very focused and methody on set?
Well, he wasn't doing. We weren't in any scenes together, so he was just hanging out. It wasn't a set. We were on location in someone's home, and so he just came by to hang out and watch. And so he was chill and relaxed and totally casual. He was really young, too. You have to remember, I mean, what year was that? I'm not going to guess because you'll get the number in front.
87.
87, okay. compared to me. I'm 64, so he's probably 60, maybe 62. So he was just a kid. I mean, he seemed very, by then I believe it was got to have been the third or fourth season of the show. And the whole principal cast was, they were really young and they clearly enjoyed the work. So, I would not call them intense. They were just very, very relaxed.
Mm-hmm. Stephen Williams, he's such a good actor. He's in that episode, and Elaine Wilkes, who I've interviewed.
Oh, cool! Got to get everybody.
Yeah, I've gotten the who's who of character actors and so forth. Yes.
Well, I am flattered that you, in the intro or the way you set it up on, I believe, Facebook, you called me a character actor, and there's no bigger compliment for an actor, I think, to be called a character actor, because they are always the most, I think, interesting and surprising. Sometimes they do the greatest variety of roles. I just think it's great. I'm always a big fan of those guys, and women too, of course.
Oh yeah, I think that character actors or journeymen as actors, as I call them too, I think they're a lot more interesting than the stars of the films and stuff. They got better stories, and they're just good people, I think.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
How do you get cast in Spellbinder?
Just an audition. It was, this is the way, back then, this is the way it worked. You did a reading for the casting director, you got a call back with the director, and unless it was a series regular part, even a recurring role, I got, recurring roles on shows that would sometimes go for, like on JAG, I was on that show for, I think, 3 years. Mm-hmm. But the audition process was very simple. It's only when you got to those, big investment main roles and what was anticipated to be a series that would run for years, so it would cost a lot of money, obviously. That's when you would just go to audition after audition after audition. Most of the work I got, even the series regular work I did on a show on Comedy Central, it was very quick. You go to the audition, you go to the callback, you get the offer, or you wouldn't get the offer. So, yeah, they were all very much a kind of regular. It was just a day in the life of going to work and trying to get a job. You go to the auditions. You were lucky to have them. You enjoyed them if you were lucky. And if you got cast, that was even better.
Yeah, I used to see this movie on HBO a lot growing up, and I always had a thing for Kelly Preston. What was she like to work with?
She was great. She was really friendly. My work in the movie is almost invisible. I was almost completely cut out of the film. Mm-hmm. Still appeared in it, but barely. Tim Daly, really nice guy. I was only there, I think, for a week, and it was a fairly low-budget film, so it shot fairly quickly. But everyone, again, very nice, very friendly. And Kelly Preston, I agree with you. I was a huge fan. It was heartbreaking when she passed away. I just found her to be charming and lovely and sweet.
Oh, yeah, very talented, too. Very talented.
I agree.
And also Rick Rossovich was in there, too. He was pretty hot in the late 80s there. He was good. Yeah.
I'll always remember Rick Rossovich from The Terminator. That's, of course, to me, even though he's only in the movie, I think, for about 3 minutes, I just remember that. I was in Vancouver shooting, I think it was when I was doing 21 Jump Street, I think. And I saw, no, that's not possible, because that would have been a little later. I can't remember the year. But I was up, Vancouver was a very popular location for television to shoot.
Oh, yeah.
Back in the 80s. And still is.
Yeah.
Vancouver and Toronto. But I was up in Vancouver shooting, probably 21 Jump Street, and went, by myself. When you're in these locations, you kind of just hang out, you got nothing to do. And like I said, you're just a guest star, and so people are not, they're very nice, but, at the end of the day, you're on your own. So I would just wander the city, and I went in and saw this little movie called The Terminator, and that was Rick Rossovich. And I remember that very vividly because, one, of course, the movie blew me away, and two, of course, I thought he was great.
Yeah, yeah. Then comes Freddy's Nightmares. Judy Miller, Come On Down. That must have been fun.
Well, how can you argue with that? Again, talking about sitting side by side with people in makeup. I sat with Freddy Krueger with Robert Englund side by side while he had Freddy put on his face, and he played a kind of wraparound narrator, like Crypt Keeper in that series. So it was rare that you would be with him, I'm told, on that, because the stories were all shot separately. But he was in my scene, my first scene in the show. He was actually in it. So I did get a chance to have a scene, sort of, with Freddy Krueger. It's kind of, I was in the bed with my wife, Judy.
Mm-hmm.
Siobhan McCaskey, I believe was the name of the actress, and he was under the bed. So they panned down to him under the bed, and they did his sort of Freddy Krueger intro to the episode from there.
I met Robert 5 years.
Bringing me down to memory lane. This is great. I'm thrilled that I'm as. First of all, I remember everything, because this is the other thing about it that I'm grateful for. I do remember these experiences so vividly because they brought me close to people and through the experience of acting that I've always wanted to work with or admired for so long. I was always a horror movie fan, so working on a Freddy Krueger project was just a dream.
Yeah, I met Robert 5 years ago at a horror convention, and I spent over 2.5 hours in line because he talks to everybody for like 10 or 15 minutes. Like he will like put everything on hold just to talk to each person. I mean, he is a great guy. And I used our picture as, my hot podcast logo, and everyone likes that picture. The director, Tom DeSimone, he's been on the podcast. He's intense. He's a great guy and a great director. Do you remember anything about him?
I remember him being very. Now that one you're pulling one out of me. I can't quite recall. I mean, I remember, like I said, it was television, so television is always done fast.
Yeah.
So it was always pretty much one take, let's move on, one take, let's move on, one take, let's move on, which to me was great because I thought, not just because of the material being kind of, the horror genre, you don't necessarily have to go back and find the nuances that you might in other genres, but I just love the idea of trusting your instincts and going. So I do recall how efficient he was. It was also incredibly complex. If you see the episode,
yeah,
there's a lot of the scenic elements. There's a big transition from the home life of this character, Judy, and I was in the scene, and then suddenly everything froze, and I had to stand very rigidly and be carried out like a prop, like I was essentially a robot. It was all fantasy. And then the entire set flew away, and it turns out that she was in a game show and she didn't know it. It was very complex. So to do it as quickly and as well as they did is a real testament to him.
Saban McCafferty, like whatever happened to her?
That's a really good question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't. I don't think she continued to. I really don't know. I shouldn't even say because I really have no idea. We were friendly for that week, and I think we might have been Facebook friends, but I haven't kept in touch with her.
Mm-hmm. And that was also Susan Oliver's last role before she passed.
And again, as a Star Trek fan, man, oh man, was that a thrill.
Yeah, and her mother was the library ghost in Ghostbusters.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. Wow.
Yes.
Fantastic.
She passed just before Susan did.
Oh, well, that was the Freddy's Nightmares shows were shot and designed to be, if desired, in syndication, to be broken into 2 separate episodes.
Mm-hmm.
Where you could play it as one solid hour. So her storyline, she played, I think she was meant to be the lead character, Judy's, like an iteration of herself from the future. I think that's the premise. So, I never had any scenes with her because they were just the two, they were only together, Siobhan and her, but Susan, but she was there on the set, so I did have a chance to talk to her, which was great because to me, from Star Trek, I remembered her so vividly as a kid.
Yeah. And she was a gorgeous woman, very talented. She played Jerry Lewis's high school crush in The Disorderly Orderly, and she tried to commit suicide, which was probably the darkest moment in any Jerry Lewis movie there ever was.
Well, I don't know. I don't know if you've ever seen The Day the Clown Cried, but
I know about it, but like it won't be released until like next year. I heard I don't know. There's going to be a screening somewhere that's been planned for like the last 40 years or something.
Are you kidding?
Yeah.
I did. That's impressive. Now I have to find out whether maybe they'll do that somewhere here in LA
Yeah, it's in LA actually.
Oh, good. Well, now I'll have to look that up.
Yeah, God, I mean that's going to be an event. If anybody cares.
I think think in LA you'll find people that care.
Oh, yeah, yeah. How is making Steel and Lace?
Well, Steel and Lace was my first project with someone who remains to be a dear friend of mine, Ernie Farina, who directed that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great. It was great fun. Ernie and I worked together again a few years later on Josh Kirby, which is a movie that shot in Bucharest, Romania, which was a thrill to visit. But Steel and Lace was, Bruce Davison and my old college friend Michael Cervers, who was, we went to college together. We played the villain in that. It was, very fast. This is going to sound like a broken record. Shot fast, relatively cheap. I think the whole thing took 14 days to make. I was sort of involved in a lot of those super, super efficient, low-budget genre pictures back in the 80s and the 90s. So I got used to that. But, that, again, was my sweet spot because that was that's my preferred viewing, too. I grew up watching Roger Corman and all the AI pictures and Sam Z. Arkoff movies. And so, to me, it was great. But Ernie, think about Ernie as the director. He was he's an old visual effects guy. He used to do main titles for James Cameron. He did the main title sequence of The Abyss and so forth. Yeah. A lot of stuff. And plus, he's a film historian. If you ever want to set up another interview, if you haven't gotten in touch with Ernie Farina, I truly recommend it.
Okay.
Because he's incredibly well-versed in cinema history and visual effects. He's written a multi-volume examination of the work of Ray Harryhausen. He's a real film scholar. So when I got the chance to meet him and work with him, you got the sense that it was, again, low budget and quick. But he would make references to movies that would inspire his setups and inspire his editing that were, classic Hollywood films. He would refer to something as, as vast as Lawrence of Arabia while we were working out a scene in Steel and Lace. That kind of thing. So and I always felt like I was in great hands working with him.
Nice. Yeah, Bruce Davison and David Naughton, I've interviewed those guys. I haven't interviewed them. I've met them at conventions. They're very, very nice guys. I did get to interview David Lander before he passed. Everybody knew him as Squiggy on Liver and Shirley.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It's quite a cast. Yeah, David Lander, Bruce Davison, Michael Cervers, like I said. Yeah, for a modest horror film, that's a pretty impressive cast.
It is. I'm sure you get recognized a lot for Star Trek The Next Generation.
Well, no, because I don't really look like a Romulan on the street. That was a dream come true. And again, I'm going to refer to my directors because everything is always about the script and the director you get to work with in addition to the actors. And that was directed by Leonard Nimoy's son, Adam.
Yeah.
So I got a chance to do some work with him. He was learning. He was a lawyer, and he was learning how to be a director. And so actually, he and my wife did some scenes with him, just on video camera, so he could get his ideas about cutting and framing and shot count and all that stuff lined up. So he did that prep work, and then he cast me in that episode. So I got a chance to just to be on the Enterprise, which to me was like, again, just going back to Susan Oliver, it was like a fantasy. And being made up as a Romulan, getting that costume, getting that makeup, walking around the Paramount lot dressed like that, it was like something out of a dream. It was fantastic.
Yeah, how many hours did it take to put that on?
It wasn't, because the makeup, the Romulan, this was, if you were a Klingon, you were in the chair for hours. The Romulans were simple. It was a forehead, 2 ears, and a wig. That's it. Mm-hmm. So I don't remember the exact amount, but I'm going to guess it was put on me in an hour, maybe an hour and a half. As I recall, it took as much time to take off as this you could put on. Because they used, no longer, we used the days of spirit gum and the old sort of traditional application techniques. They used surgical adhesive that seamless, look between the appliance and your skin. And with that, they would paint on, it would dry, they would, put makeup on top of it. That was super fast. But then to take it off was super slow because you would take your skin with it if you weren't careful. So, I remember it being almost, if not as long, maybe longer to take off the makeup than it was to put it on.
Yeah, was the cast welcoming?
Totally. Again, a nicer group of people. Jonathan Frakes, Brent Spiner. I've worked with these people in other capacities in voice acting since, and they could not be a nicer bunch of people. They're super nice.
Mm-hmm. Have you been invited to the Star Trek conventions?
I have not been invited to the conventions because I've never really pursued the convention route, even though I've done a lot of anime voices and I've done the genre movies, the horror films, and Star Trek, and I have signed a bunch of collectible cards. And of all the work I've done over the years, the most requests I get for autographs and for memorabilia is from Star Trek. I've got 3 on my desk right now. And how long ago was that? It's got to be 30 years ago. So yeah, they're the most avid fans, and I understand. I get it. I went to the first Star Trek convention in 1977 in New York City, where Shatner and DeForest Kelley and Leonard Nimoy all.
Wow.
I was just like a kid, and I got myself to Times Square. I forget where it was. It was somewhere in the city, and went to that. I think it was the very first Star Trek convention. Yeah, so I understand those fans. I really do.
Now, it's getting to the point now where, like, if you guest starred on any of the Star Trek series one time, you'll get invited to do a convention.
I guess. I mean, I know now because I have so many friends from that world. Andy Robinson, who played Scorpio in Dirty Harry, going back to that part of the conversation, then went on to direct Star Trek Next Generation and appear on it.
Yeah.
And then, I know Armin Shimmerman.
Oh, yeah.
And John Delancey, and these people some of them are major players on the shows. And I know a lot of people who do the 1 or 2 episodes. And once you get locked into the convention circuit, you are going to be busy probably year-round. But it requires that initial sort of connection into it. And they have whole now representation and agents that deal with just conventions, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I never did it, and maybe I should have, but it was just not something I made time for. So I probably missed out on some great travel because of it. But no, I've never actually appeared at a Star Trek convention.
That's not too late, next few years, maybe.
Never know. Hey, look, I would love to, mostly because I just love the band so much, and I love the show so much.
Yeah.
I always have.
So was Leprechaun 3 a standard audition for you?
Well, yes and no. When I was in high school, like a lot of young people, my hobby was magic. I loved magic. And I practiced, and I used to do kids' parties as a way of making money when I was in high school. So it was sort of a business, sort of a passion. And I went to conventions and so forth. And when I got the invitation to audition for Leprechaun 3, in the script, the character I played was Fazio, the magician. Yeah. And in the script, he's described as a mid-50s, balding, fat, sort of has-been. Not to say that being bald or fat makes you has-been, but he was described as a kind of defeated character. And at the time, this is, 1994, I guess, I was in my 30s. I was none of those things. I had a full head of hair, at least put that much. And so I wanted to be in the movie because it's a horror movie, and I love horror movies.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go to the audition because on the bottom of my resume it said special skills, and I put magic. So I think that's what got me the audition. And rather than just go to the audition, I went into the room. And I have to say, one thing I'm really proud of from that day and from now is I'm basically fearless. I'll try anything I find it really fun to go in and take a chance, take a risk. So I brought in a boombox, and I brought in some cards and some silks. And at the audition, I just walked into the room, I pressed play, it played a very cheesy song.
Yeah.
I did a little magic show. And I did an intentionally bad magic show for them. And that's what got me the job. So they rewrote the character to make him more like Siegfried, and Roy had a baby, and his name was Fazio. And that's how I got that job, yeah. So I love it. And I still talk to Brian Trenchard Smith, the director of that, who actually I later learned he directed one of my favorite kung fu movies from the 70s with George Lazenby called Man from Hong Kong. So I got to know all this stuff at the time. I got to work with Brian at the Ambassador Hotel downtown Los Angeles, where famously, unfortunately, Robert Kennedy was assassinated, but it was a famous landmark Park in L.A. It's now gone, of course, but that was Las Vegas, was downtown L.A. in the Ambassador Hotel. Whole movie shot in 2 weeks.
Yeah. God, this has always been my favorite out of all of them because it's just...
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it's got so much comedy in it, and you know I love the Vegas motif and everything, and yeah, I mean, did you give Fazio a backstory, because it's like him and Loretta are like a Bonnie and Clyde couple of grifters, you know?
There are times, this is a kind of a funny way of thinking about it, but this is one thing I learned in acting school, is that some parts require a lot of homework. And like a backstory and a lot of character biography. And sometimes you just don't. And when I walked into the Ambassador, actually we had a table read of the script before we shot. And I met Carolyn Williams, who played Loretta. We just hit it off. I knew we were going to be friends. And I knew we were going to work well together. And so we never discussed background. We just started making stuff up on the set. Almost everything that we do in that movie, she and I together, is improvised or came from an improv that we showed to Brian and then was used in the movie. Almost everything. Brian was great that way, and his movie ethic is really so much fun. So I'm not saying we had to make up for something that wasn't there. It was there. But we would come up with little behavioral things, or we would add a line. I think I added a line in that movie about bend over, I'll pull a rabbit out of your ass. I just made that up.
I love that line.
Oh, thank you. Well, I appreciate that. And like there was a moment where we see John Gaddens go into an elevator, and then we do this little, so almost like a cartoonish, bend over together and laugh together. That's all stuff we just made up. The magic show that Fazio does in the movie, I just made that up. They said they put me in the theater, which was in the Ambassador Hotel, and there were a bunch of props just sitting there. They said, we're going to shoot the magic show in about an hour. And I said, great. And nobody said, it just says in the script, a terrible magic show.
Yeah.
I said, I don't remember exactly, but that's basically the threat. And I thought, okay, and I just made up a magic show that went horribly, horribly wrong. And showed it to Brian. He went, great, let's film it. And that was it. I mean, it was like that. He's an extremely collaborative guy. So I didn't do a lot of backstory. I just shot from the hip and had fun.
I've talked to Brian. He's a great guy. Yeah, I mean he's a very prolific, B movie director, and also I've talked.
His book is great. I'll recommend his book because it's Adventures in the B Movie Trade. It's called, and if anybody wants to have a real sort of behind the scenes look at what it is to be that kind of a director and work in that genre, I highly recommend Brian's book.
I gotta check it out. Yeah, Tom Dugan, who played the casino manager Art, he's been on. Very funny guy.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, you had good chemistry with Caroline Williams. I mean, that classic scene, where her ass and lips blow up is hilarious.
Yes, and I'm sure if you've seen there's a Blu-ray release of all the Leprechaun films. Came out a couple of years ago. I don't know. I forget who this was.
I have a DVD collection, but it's not Blu-ray.
Oh no, but but what they did. The reason I said it was because I didn't want to tell you a story that you already knew. But that in that, when she makes her wish, Carolyn's character Loretta, and then just before she blows up and becomes, she's become super sexy, and then I steal the coin from her, and then I go off and I become the greatest magician in the world. But in that scene in my dressing room when I steal the coin, that was shot at about 2 o'clock in the morning on one of the nights of the 2-week shoot. And I left the room in the master shot, and then we went in for some tighter coverage. And when I ran out of the room in one of the coverage shots, the door did not close. So, because I was supposed to slam the door. And so I reached back behind me to close the door, and she didn't realize I had. And so she, in an attempt to save the shot, she kicked the door and took off the top of my middle finger at my left hand. So I was driven to the emergency room, had to have my fingertips reattached. And if you look in the last scenes of the movie, where I'm doing the big show at the end, before I'm cut in half, I'm wearing gloves. It's because my left hand is completely bandaged. And the gloves, they just sewed sequins into the bandage so that you would not notice, and then I wore a glove on my right hand to make it look like it was, I looked like Michael Jackson, basically. It was only because my finger was in a cast.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, the only reason I mentioned that, they did a behind the scenes on the Blu-ray of the movies, all of them. Everyone got their own little behind the scenes. And so I told that story in that behind the scenes, and then I started noticing people were saying they were listening to podcasts, usually around St. Patty's Day, of all of the Leprechaun movies, and my people started asking me about, what happened to your finger? And I realized somebody must be watching the Blu-ray because they heard the story.
Yeah. Yeah. Warwick Davis, he won't do HorrorCons from what I've been told. I don't know. I don't know what the reason is for, but he was good to work with.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah. There's a picture of the two of us that is a Polaroid. You know, back in the day,
yeah,
you had to have photos taken for continuity on set, for makeup and hair and for props. They would use Polaroids, and there's a picture of he and I between takes, just sitting together. The makeup artist, I believe, the continuity person, said, "Hey, let me take a picture of you guys." And we were just talking, and there's a great picture of me as Fazio and Warwick in full makeup, sitting side by side. I think I'm resting my hand on his knee. And it's my Facebook profile page every St. Patty's Day. I put it on Facebook. Years and years have gone by. That's still my favorite St. Patrick's Day memory. So, yeah.
The lead, John Gattens, he became like a casting director or a screenwriter or something like that.
He became a screenwriter. He wrote a great movie with Denzel Washington. He became very good. I think he wrote several features that got greenlit and were made into terrific movies, but the one I remember most distinctly is, gosh, I can't remember the title of it. I think it might have simply been called Flying or something, or I don't remember The Flight, but Denzel Washington plays an airline pilot who's an alcoholic and a drug addict, but who rescues, the plane is going down through no fault because he manages to land safely and save everybody's life, but then when they find out that he was under the influence of drugs and alcohol, it becomes a big scandal. Anyway, John wrote the script, and it's a great movie. So I did not know when I punched him in a hotel room back in 1994, he would go on to become such a great playwright. I'm a screenwriter at this point.
Yeah. I always wanted to know, what was that steaming green thing that was in your hand? It looked like was it supposed to be leprechaun shit, or was it like silly putty?
Well, it was supposed to be leprechaun shit, as you say. What it was mashed potatoes with a piece of dry ice under it, so it was smoke.
Okay. I never understood what that was.
Dyed green mashed potatoes with dry ice. I can feel it in my hand now. 28 years later, I can still feel it sitting in the palm of my hand.
Were you satisfied with your death scene?
How could you not be satisfied with your death scene? My God, I got sawed in half by Warwick Davis. I mean, it could not have been better.
Do you
yeah.
Do you remember The Wizard of Gore?
Oh yeah, Herschel Gordon Lewis movie. I love The Wizard of Gore.
That's what it reminded me of.
I mean, I'm so inspired by you. The fact that I knew that who the director of Wizard of Gore was should tell you something about me. I love The Wizard of Gore, and there's a great. In fact, I will just for fun. If you own a copy of The Wizard of Gore, this is too close to show you how focused I am, how much I love this kind of stuff. There's a great shot at the end of Wizard of Gore. Talk about a low budget movie.
Yeah, I had The Wizard of Gore himself, Ray Sager, on about a year and a half ago.
Oh my God!
I'm going to be honest with you, strange man, really strange man.
I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it for a second. He does a thing. We'll talk about that. He's got the gray makeup. He couldn't have been more than like 25 when he made that movie. He has the gray makeup on, and then he, at some very compelling moment at the end, he turns directly to the camera and says, "Concentrate." And then he says, "Concentrate." And if he stumbles, he says, instead of concentrate, he says, "Concentrate." I can't even say it. And my wife and I, my then girlfriend, my now wife and I, watched that. I owned it on VHS. We watched it again and again because he so clearly messes up, but they obviously didn't care or they didn't have the money to do another take. So the next time you watch The Wizard of Gore, check it out. It's very compelling to watch these sorts of things happen. And then for some reason I remember that one very distinctly. I love Herschel Gordon Lewis movies.
Yeah, it's a great movie, and sadly, I haven't been able to find any other people who has worked with him. He hired a lot of lost souls who were like not in the business, and a lot of them just went MIA or they're passed away now. Sadly.
Sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, he was very. I mean, I don't know where. I think he made his movies in Florida, and because he was a drive-in movie in local.
Him and Bill Greffy were like the two Florida B movie guys.
Right.
And I've talked to Bill.
So,
yeah.
Oh, cool, man! I got to check out your podcast. It was fantastic.
Oh yeah, you're gonna find a lot of gems there. A lot of gems. Tell me about Conan the Adventurer.
Oh God, I have a story for every one of these, and I'm so sorry to say this. I have to be off in 10 minutes.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I have a meeting, so I'll tell this one quick, and I'm sorry to say that because I'm having such a great time.
Yeah.
Conan the Adventurer was shot in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, which was like an interesting thing because as an actor, I got to go to Mexico. It was fun. I got to be there for I think it was a week and a half. But Conan the Adventurer, if you ever see the episode, the entire thing had to be post-dubbed. Everyone had to do the lines over because the soundstage was so low rent, shall we say, that it was raining for many of the days that we were there shooting, and you could hear the rain on the rooftop of the studio. So we had to record all of the dialogue over. So if you're looking at the show, I mean, I got to work. It was great fun. I got to do sword fighting, and I got to have this amazing cast and work with I forgot the actor's name. Here's the first name I'll forget. Who played Conan in that? He was a huge guy like Arnold, but not Arnold. Anyway, I apologize to you wherever you are. But everyone was super nice, but ultimately it was all so silly because we had to re-record all the dialogue.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. It's funny. I'm not every single person you've asked me about, and I'm really proud of this. I'm not proud. I feel lucky. Every single experience, every single person, I have nothing but great memories and really wonderful people to work with, I'm not just making that up. I do really like people who work in this business, and so when you get a chance to collaborate and spend a week wearing, medieval garb and swinging a broadsword, what could be bad about that?
Absolutely. I mean, sword and sorcery, medieval, the fantasy genre, as they call it. Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, I love it.
Did you work with Marie Cheatham in that episode?
I don't recall. Now you're catching me on two ones. Now I don't remember Marie Cheatham. No, I don't know.
Sweet lady. She was on Days of Our Lives when it first started back in the 60s.
Was she the witch? She was the witch.
In this episode, yeah.
Okay, then of course I did. We had nothing but scenes together. I'm sorry I didn't remember her name.
Yeah. That's okay. So, what made you get into voiceover work?
I just found that it was, like any actor, if you have an opportunity to try something and make a living and make money at it, that's great. And it started becoming people would start to ask me about my voice because I was, maybe it was my theater background or something, but I was just doing, I was just proficient in that way. I was invited to audition for the voice of a Japanese anime show back in like the early 90s, which was called Tenchi Muyo, which was directed by a theater director I had worked with, who was also from the American Conservatory Theater. And when I got that job and dubbed my first Japanese cartoon into English, I felt so comfortable, so much at home with that freedom that being in a sound studio as opposed to being in front of the camera presented. I had no problem being in front of the camera, but one of the things about making films, even TV, or even low-budget movies that are shot in 14 days, there's an awful lot of sitting around and doing nothing.
Oh, yeah.
People are working like crazy. I mean, you're lucky to be an actor and doing nothing. But that sort of slowness and that waiting, I found it kind of, less than enjoyable. I mean, I found it kind of mind-numbing. When I got to do voiceovers, there was no waiting. It was about work. You had to create things quickly. You had to use your full imagination and full range of your vocal abilities and your character, choices. Everything you had to do, but it was relatively fast. So when I was starting to work as a voice actor and getting more work, I felt like this is something I would love to find out more about because I loved the variety of it, and I loved the efficiency of it. And it's turned out to be, if you look at my whole career, if you look at my IMDb or whatever source, you'll see, even though some of the stuff actually predates my graduating from school, because I did English dubs of movies that were made, back in the 70s and the 80s, but I was obviously not working then as a voice actor. But you'll see a ton more voice work towards that middle 90s period and moving forward, because I just found that to be the most exciting, the most fun work I could do.
And are you still teaching?
I'm not teaching at the moment, no, because because of my voice acting, I became a voice director. And because I worked in ADR for a long time, I just got a whole roster of voice talent that I'd worked with over the years. So I started directing English language dubs when that had the big upswing for Netflix in the mid 2017, when that new movement came in where a lot of actors were working in English dubbing. I actually have been working in voice acting, so I transitioned to directing at that point. And so because of that directing, I started becoming more engaged with Netflix as a company, and they ultimately brought me on board as a production manager to help them choose directors, choose actors, choose studios, choose writers to do the adaptations. So I do that now, and that doesn't give me time to teach anymore.
Yeah. Before we sign off here, do you have any upcoming projects you'd like to mention?
Well, everything, like I said, everything I'm doing right now is actually as a production manager at Netflix. So my former students, my former colleagues, and people that I'm meeting in this new work that I do as I travel. I've been to Europe for this work. I'm going up to Canada regularly. I'm looking forward to going to Asia this summer. I love when I'm given the power to give people jobs. Mm-hmm. So I'm now hiring people or recommending people, and now I'm seeing an effect where my former students and my former colleagues are working a lot, and I'm getting them opportunities. Now, ultimately, like with any opportunity, it's just I open the door, I help them get through the door, and then it's not me that makes them great. They're just great. But it makes me so happy to give them that chance. And so I'm really doing that more than anything else right now. So I'm working for Netflix in many, doing the English dubs of many languages, and continuing to develop what will hopefully become a real high level of creative excellence in English language dubbing here in the United States. That's my focus right now.
Oh, that is awesome, John. I'm glad that you're doing what you love, and I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing these great stories.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me, and I'm sorry. I could honestly go down memory lane like this and talk about these individuals, because every single memory is such a pleasure to recall. So thanks for taking me on that ride. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, sir. You have yourself a great day, and be safe out there.
I will. You too. It's great to talk to you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Well, there you have it. John DeMita. Isn't he a cool dude? DeMita. I'm sorry. John DeMita. Wow, great stories there, huh? And man, a man of many talents, and very humble guy, not like Fazio at all. It was a great conversation, and I'm glad I got to talk to him today. Well, until next time, this is Tommy Throwback Kovac saying, there's no shame in living in the past, because the present sucks. Later, dudes.